Hello, music lovers of the world. Welcome to episode 38 of What Makes This Song Special. The show where every week I take a song, I talk about why it's special to me, what does it remind me of in my life and that makes it important to me as a song. Why is it a kind of desert island disc of mine? We've done 37 already. If you want to look back and listen to the stories and listen to the cover versions of the songs. As always, I'll be telling you a wee story. I'll then talk a little bit about Justin Hawkins' voice, because we always do a wee vocal coach takedown of the vocalist's technique. And at the end, you'll be given a wee click somewhere that you can watch my version of today's song, which is I Believe in a Thing Called Love by The Darkness. So we'll dive into today's story. We're going to go back to round about autumn, winter, the sunset of 2003. At the time I was signed to TRL Records, who were a Glasgow label based in the sort of Finnieston end of the famous Argyle Street. And my manager at the time, Brian Harris, or Uncle Brian, as we had taken to calling him, had got us tickets to a Musicians Union event. So this was an event where there would be lots of big record company executives there, along with A&R folk, etc, etc. The type of people that you want to impress, the type of people who can accelerate your career if you make the right impression. Unfortunately, at the time, we were too late to be invited. We got a kind of last minute invite, so we weren't given a slot to go up and sing a song, or play a song, but we'd been invited along to sort of schmooze, I think that's the right term, schmooze with these kind of bigger boys of the record business. And at the time, I had a sort of merry band of session players. I was recording my first sort of solo album, and we had sort of session players and friends who were all kind of part of this project, who were all playing different parts on the album. Some names that I've mentioned in previous episodes. There was Davey the Bluesman Monroe, there was Chris Mack on bass, Michael Oakley, a couple of others who were sessioning, who I can't remember exactly who was there that day, so I'm not going to throw names in just in case it's not, not the truth. It's a bit of a blur. But anyway, we turn up at the Tramway Theatre in Glasgow for this event. And as I say, there were a few big record company folk there, but there were also some famous faces there, some Scottish celebrity actors and musicians and folk that were instantly recognisable, which made it quite exciting, made it feel like it was a big deal to be there, to get a guest slot. And it was one of those events that a lot of people like to go to so that they can seem or feel like they're really important and cool, even when they're not. And I suppose we were doing exactly the same thing. We were devouring the free buffet, trying to make conversation with folk that we thought could help us in our quest for fame. And there were some bands that were there debuting singles and albums on the main stage, which was annoying. We were jealous because we wanted to be up there doing exactly that. And we were kind of hoping if we made the right impressions, maybe we could play at the next one or whatever, So they were going up to showcase their stuff every so often, and we were walking about having a chat with various folk. So I remember being a bit gutted, as I said, that we weren't playing, but having got the last minute invite, we were just hoping that we would meet some folk who could point us in the right direction. So you'll find out in a minute why we didn't get a next time. That there was no next time to be had, for reasons that will unfold as I tell the story. But anyway, at one point we start talking to this guy who at first seemed like he was important because of the way he sort of presented, but less than a minute into the conversation we kind of basically realised he was a nutter. A nutter, for anyone who doesn't know, is a sort of British colloquial term for someone who's maybe slightly deranged. I feel a bit bad saying that, but the guy was a bit off the beaten track, shall we say. So anyway, Brian, our manager, he was off chatting to folk, trying to get us some important gigs and breaks, and this guy had the 5 or 6 of us that were there in a sort of captive audience as he starts to tell us that he was screwed over by Phil Collins and various other artists. He's got this really intense look in his eyes, and he's trying to convince us that he wrote the New Order classic Blue Monday, that he wrote Phil Collins hits Another Day in Paradise and Against All Odds, and he told us that he wrote various Kylie Minogue songs that we'd never heard of, but that had apparently been stolen from him. He'd written all these songs, and people had taken these songs from him and covered them and taken them as their own, and he was never given. So I don't know how he got there. The guy was definitely crazy, but we were doing a really incredible job of keeping the straight faces until, of course, my mate Michael, who I've mentioned in previous episodes, who was the keyboard player and co-producer on the album, he just starts laughing and making sarcastic comments or funny comments to try and make us all break while speaking to this guy, which was a bit cruel, but it was really funny. And we're trying not to obviously laugh in the guy's face as he's telling us all these stories. Then the guy got really angry and he pulled this cassette tape out of his pocket and he was like, the original songs are all in here and they're mine. And at that point we were kind of like, we kind of really need to get rid of this guy now. So I can't remember how we managed to lose him, but we kind of lost him just in time for the main act starting their set on the main stage. I think the band was Idlewild. Idlewild were this kind of Scottish band that were about at the time, who had kind of some fairly decent fame. I don't think they were like a kind of household celebrity name, but they did have some success at the time. They were kind of a big deal for that in that era. I'm sure it was them. It was on the main stage. Anyway, everybody gathered into the room to watch the main event because they weren't just one of the bands who were doing bits and pieces. They were, there to kind of launch their new album, and it was kind of actually apparent that this was probably a big scheme to get them. It was probably like the record company that set this thing up so that everybody went along to watch their album being debuted. And so anyway, we're standing there waiting for them to start, and they start, and I'm kind of looking to find Michael to kind of have a laugh with about the guy who had claimed that he'd written all those songs, because I was just looking for a bit of a giggle. And I couldn't see Michael, and the minute I couldn't see Michael, I panicked, because I've mentioned a couple of stories about Mike before on the show. Now, Mike's been my best mate since we were primary school, but he's got an obsession with delinquency. And these types of events were nerve-wracking with Mike because Mike has no filter, so he would always be ready to do or say something outrageous, inappropriate, and I'd be left to pick up the pieces because it was my name, it was me, it was my solo project at this point. This wasn't like one of the bands that were in it. It was kind of by this point sort of Rico, Frankie and the Vibe, so there was a band, but it was like my name on the band. So this was nerve-wracking, and I'm looking around trying to find Michael, and the band they're playing halfway through their opening song and everybody's watching, and I just see well, first of all I see a few people in front of me get distracted by something, and then they start to point at the stage, and I'm thinking, what's happening on the stage that I can't see? And I'm trying to work out what's on the stage, and of course I look up, and above the stage I just see this bare bottom, a bare arse, as we say in Britain. I see somebody's bare arse hanging above the main stage, and of course I know immediately that it's Michael. I'm like, there's only one person that it could be. And of course I start giggling like a 10-year-old schoolgirl, and as do most of the people around us who have spotted this. And the band are playing, which is really unfair for the band because they're clueless as to why everybody starts laughing and pointing at them at the stage. And we're in stitches laughing because we're looking up and we can just see this bare bum hanging above the main stage. And there was a few security folk there and stuff. We were trying to work out how he'd get up there and trying to get up to him. And he'd obviously managed to find a little corridor, a passageway that took you to a place where I presume the lighting engineers were supposed to be. So this bare white bum's wiggling away to the beat of the music, and by now the whole place, apart from the folk who were kind of managing and representing the band on stage, were dying. We're just in fits of laughter. The poor band, they're playing away, trying to work out why everybody's laughing at them. They stop playing, people start shouting, there's a whole commotion, and the next thing I remember, we're all in the back of Uncle Brian's car. And none of us know what to say. And I remember there was a kind of silence in the back of the car, and Uncle Brian just went, "Ridiculous." And we were all like school kids. I mean, we were men by this point in our 20s. We were still laughing away. Very early 20s, to be fair, but yeah, laughing away like little schoolboys. And yeah, that's all we heard from the front of the car, and we just sat in silence knowing that he was absolutely raging. So, very immature boys. I mean, looking back, it was absolutely absurd. But at the time, it was the stuff of legend. You know, like I remember telling folk that story. My non-musician pals, when I met up with them the following weekend, and I'm telling them that story, and they're laughing in stitches about, you know, another classic Mike story. So I'm surprised we didn't get dropped from the label. To be fair, that day Uncle Brian was desperately unhappy with us, but eventually saw the funny side of it. I remember just telling us to shut up in the car on the way home, as he very kindly went to drop us off one by one back at our houses. And I remember sort of like in the back of the car, sort of reflecting on the more serious parts of the day. You know, for me, not the mooning and the guy who claimed that he wrote all of Phil Collins' hits, but the bands that were emerging from the scene at the time. So the bands who had got a slot that day that weren't us, they sounded nothing like us. You know, they were all boring indie bands with forgettable songs. I feel bad saying that, but that's what I felt at the time. They were all kind of like trying to be Oasis or trying to be something like that, you know. And there were no big anthems. I mean, Oasis have got big anthems. That's kind of, I'm contradicting myself there, but they were like Oasis but without the big anthems, you know. We were writing these big sort of 80s type anthems, and I knew a lot of people probably thought we were trying to hang on to a sound that had its time at that point. You know, we sounded like Queen meets Bon Jovi with a touch of the Manic Street Preachers, you know, like 80s and 90s bands, and we were stuck in 2003. And I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that sort of emerged from the laughter, and I started worrying that we weren't going to make it. You know, I was in the silence in the back of the car was just making me think. And honestly, just at that moment, like, the song changes on the radio from whatever terrible song it was, and on comes I Believe in a Thing Called Love by The Darkness. And it's this 80s, it's as 80s rock as you can imagine. Big screeching head voice vocals, harmonising lead guitars, a guitar solo, you know, something that wasn't really about at that point. A big anthemic rock chorus, you know, and I'm like, who are these guys? Why is this on the radio? Are they an 80s band that have escaped me? Why am I only hearing about them now? And then the radio announcer says, that was The Darkness with their new single, I Believe in a Thing Called Love. And my eyes lit up, and I just thought, new single? These guys are on the radio now. These guys are new. These aren't like, this isn't a song that I've, you know, from the 70s or 80s that I missed. This is a new band, and they sound more 80s than we do. You know, this is possible. You know, it's possible for us to, with our not as 80s sound as that, to definitely get on the radio, become mainstream. You know, we're going to be all right. And I remember just breaking the silence of the car by going, my God, that was awesome. And just heard Brian in the front going, shut up in the back. So he was still absolutely fuming at that point. But I remember that day I went home desperate to hear more of this band, The Darkness, and hang on to the hope that they'd paved the way for other bands like us who still wanted to write and perform stadium rock stuff, you know. Unfortunately, we never made it, but for a few minutes that day, I was pumped full of hope that it was possible, thanks to hearing that song on the radio. Now, in making this episode, I had a YouTube wormhole venture into what The Darkness are doing now, as I often do when I'm going to talk about the singer's vocals. I always want to hear how their vocals are sounding now. So I went onto YouTube. It turns out Justin has a really cool YouTube channel where he talks about music and music-related stuff, and it's very good. He loves a clickbait title. You know, those titles that make you click because they lure you into an answer to the question posed in the title. Genius. You know, I'm going to have to use more of them, which I have today for today's video, as you will already be aware. But it would be lovely if Justin watched this and gave me a shout out. But anyway, check out his channel, really cool. It's called Justin Hawkins Rides Again. It's got a really cool wee introduction. Very cool. So yeah, let's talk about his voice. Justin has an awesome voice, really great range, great use of his registers. His switching gears, if you like, between chest and head voice is perfect. His head voice is really connected. He uses bags of glottal compression on his head voice to create more closure to aperture ratio, which gives his head voice a really powerful tone. Not that breathy falsetto sound that a lot of singers get when they move on to the ligament of the chords. You can hear his Freddie Mercury and other rock legend influences, but he's also undoubtedly unique and recognisable in his own right. Great diaphragmatic support, which he shows by managing long phrases whilst holding back on air output, and almost, just an awesome tone for that type of music that the Darkness are famous for, which is that classic rock sound. And I had a look at some recent live stuff too, and his voice still sounds brilliant. So he's obviously looked after his voice over the years in order for it to still sound so good. So well done to Justin Hawkins. So that's my wee story for today. A funny wee story. Hopefully you found it amusing. That's what the song reminds me of. It reminds me of that day. A little bit of hope after a day of madness. Please click for part 2, and I'll do my own piano version of The Darkness, I Believe in the Thing Called Love. Please leave some comments and let me know why the song's special to you. Thanks so much.